Hi, welcome to week 5 of Law and Ethics. This week we are just going to spend some time going back over what we've been talking to you about over the previous 4 weeks, because I think it's really important that you take time to consolidate your knowledge, because there is quite a lot to learn for law and ethics for this module, but it's important that you do learn it. So far we've been through some really important key subjects. We've been looking at the basics of law, about the courts, and we've looked at contempt and defamation. So we're going to spend some time going back over each of those subjects, just to make sure you've got those firmly in your mind, and then we can move on over the coming weeks to some other important topics. So let me just put myself down in the corner down there. So yeah, we're going to be looking at the story so far. Start with, though, make sure you have found out a way to look at McNay's Essential Law for Journalists. Now, the most likely way of that is that you have got your own copy of McNay's. So it needs to be the 25th edition. So I've been banging on about McNay's for a while, and hopefully you have understood that it's a fundamental core text for this module. And each week we've been giving you reading from that. So please make sure you're staying up to speed with the reading. If you're not sure what that reading is, it's at the end of the slides for each week. And I'll keep on giving you reading at the end of this today's this series of video lectures. I will give you some more reading for the coming week, for week 6, but that at the end. To start with, I did want to just remind you about the assignments. So the first assignment is an essay for this module, and that is worth 50% of the overall marks for the Law and Ethics module. So the essay question I gave you right back at the beginning of the trimester. So it's a 1,000-word essay, and the essay question is: explain the impact the law of contempt has on the work of a journalist in England and Wales. You must give a basic description of the law of contempt in England and Wales, describe the key defences that are available, and illustrate your answer with a recent example of a contempt case heard in the British courts. So that's the essay question. So it's quite explicit about what it wants you to include in your essay. But just so there's no confusion, I've also provided basically a plan for your essay. So if you stick to this plan, you won't go too far wrong. So this is available in the module. If you go in there, you'll see a document called Essay Guidance, and if you follow this, you should get everything in there. So I want you to start with a brief introduction summarizing what your essay will include. I then want you to move on to name the relevant legislation in England and Wales, and without providing any spoilers or ruining the ending, that's the Contempt of Court Act 1981. I want you to say that. I want you to show that you recognize that there is a piece of legislation which applies to contempt. I then want you to move on to clearly explain how the law is applied in England and Wales. So I will expect you to talk about the fact that you understand there is strict liability contempt enshrined within the Contempt of Court Act 1981. I'll expect you to say what strict liability means, i.e. that intent is irrelevant, and I'll expect you to define what constitutes contempt. So that's publishing material which creates a substantial risk of serious prejudice or impediment to active proceedings, and then I will expect you to explain what active proceedings means. You should know that when there's an arrest, when there's a charge, when there is a summons. So there's some detail within that I'll expect you to provide. It would also be worth mentioning that you're aware of common law contempt, but I don't want you to go on about that. I want you to just mention briefly common law contempt and what that is and what the definition of that is, which, as you know, is slightly different to the definition for strict liability contempt. So that's got us through those initial bits where we've named the law, then we've defined what contempt means. So we've provided those key definitions. I then want you to move on to set out the main defences. So think about what are the main defences, and not trying to make it too difficult, then enshrined under Section 3, Section 4 and Section 5 of the Contempt of Court Act 1981. So I want you just to very briefly say what each of those means. What is a Section 3 defence? What's a Section 4 defence? And what's a Section 5 defence? We've talked about those in the lecture back in week 2, and I'm going to be running through it in today's video lecture. So that shouldn't be too difficult. It's also worth mentioning there's a Section 10 defence, which I haven't really gone on about very much, but it's known as the Shield Law, as a defence where we as journalists which we can use in order to protect our sources. So it would be worth mentioning Section 10, not at any great length, just show that you're aware of it. So you've dealt with the defences. Then you come on to the bit of the essay where you need to go and do some of your own research, really, and I'm asking you to find a relevant case study, a relevant recent case study to illustrate the law of contempt in operation. So I expect you to go away and find a case study, so a case that has appeared in the British courts, which involved contempt. It's best to focus on a case that is finished, because then that way you know what the result was, and so you can draw some conclusions from it. It's best if it involves journalists. So there are contempt cases which don't involve journalists. Other people are involved, are prosecuted with contempt, but it would make your case much more relevant if it involves journalists. So have a think about that. And it needs to be recent. So I would expect it to be something which happened within the last 10 years. So the more recent, the better. So once you've done that, you need to give a brief outline of the case, explain what happened, what defence was used in the case, and draw some conclusions about what does it tell us about the operation of the law of contempt. You then need to come to a final conclusion for your whole essay. Now, the essay asked you to explain the impact of the law of contempt, so I expect you to explain that in your conclusions. Say, what is the overall impact of the law of contempt on the work of a journalist? Excuse me. Finish with that bit. So a couple of reminders. All parts of your essay must relate to the law in England and Wales. So don't go off and start looking for cases that have happened in America or somewhere else in the world. They have laws of contempt elsewhere, but I'm interested in the law specifically in England and Wales. You need to stick to the word count. So it's a 1,000-word essay, so we always operate on a plus or minus 10%, so between 900 and 1,100 words. Anything more won't be marked. Anything under that, you probably missed something. Your word count needs to include quotes and in-text citations, but it doesn't include your bibliography. And you need to reference your work correctly. So that's Harvard 6 referencing. And if you are not sure what Harvard 6 referencing is, it's what you should have used in your Intro to Journalism essay. If you're still struggling, there's some details on Blackboard, and you can see a link on this slide, which is available on Blackboard as well. So be able to go through to a guide to show you how to use Harvard 6 referencing. It's important you use the correct style of referencing. Don't just make it up for yourself. If you're struggling with writing essays, if it's something you know is a problem for you, there's lots of help available online. So there's a link there which is also available on Blackboard, and you'll find it in this slide, which will also be on Blackboard, telling you how to write an essay. The university itself, the library, provides help, and it provides the Word Scope scheme, which is a course you can take, a short course you can take to help you with your academic writing. And then there's also help with Harvard referencing. It's worth getting this cracked. I've given you a plan basically for this essay, so I've set out exactly what I expect you to include. I've talked you through it. I've told you the sorts of information I expect you to include, but I want you to show that you've done further reading, that you fully understand the things that you're saying. So I don't want you just to repeat the words I've just used in this video lecture. That tells you what I'm expecting you to include in terms of information, but I want you to show that you've got a broader and deeper understanding of these issues. The deadline for the essay is 4 p.m. on Friday, March the 19th. And that's 2 weeks away now. So make sure that you are getting on top of this essay. If you haven't already, you've got access to all the information you need. You've got the lecture, we've having this refresher, you can look at McNay's. Make sure you're right on top of this. I should have mentioned in your bibliography, I expect to see sort of around 6 references, ideally more, but aim for around 6. McNay's needs to be one of those to show that you're dealing with the core text of this module, but there are other books on the reading list which are available through Blackboard. The second assignment for this module is the exam, so that's worth the other half of the marks, other 50% of the marks. That will be held on Tuesday, May the 18th, 10 o'clock in the morning. It's a 90-minute exam. It'll be held online, so you can do it from wherever you are. You just need to make sure you've got a good internet connection and somewhere safe and quiet where you can work. We'll provide the grade for you about 15 working days later. You'll be used to this now, 15 working days, so that doesn't include weekends or public holidays. And just to stress that you must pass the exam. You have to score at least 40% in the exam in order to pass the module. In most modules, it's just an average of the 2 assessments. For the Law and Ethics exam, our accrediting body, the BJTC, insists that you pass a law exam. So you must pass this exam in order to pass the module. So if you don't pass the exam, no matter what your module average is, you will need to come back and redo the exam later on. So it's worth revising and working for that exam. But that's not until May the 18th. You'll have plenty of time to revise before then. The key thing I would mention is that I really want you to think about structuring your thoughts. And during this revision session, we'll be doing that. I'll be helping you structure your knowledge of each of these topics. So the first thing I want you to know the legislation for each topic. So what is the name of the law that affects each topic? I want you to know the key definitions that affects each area, and I then want you to know the defences that are available for each area of law. So I'm going to be talking about all of these topics over the following few videos. I'm going to split it up into several videos so you can go through and find each one for this week. But we're going to be talking about the basics of law, we're going to be talking about the courts, we're going to talk about contempt of court, and then we're going to talk about defamation. So I'll end this video here and then provide further shorter videos on each of those topics to help your revision.